Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. It's kind of a special hello. I'm seeing a few additional people here. So a shout out to Denise, who is back. So you're now a two-timer. And no, let me put this. You're now a visitor again and becoming, hey, you're actually part of the community. Sorry about that. I just realized it could mean something different in a different context. So let's put it differently. It is good to have Denise as part of the community. It is good to have Exodus 21:20 there. So, um, you may be interesting to have people here. Radical Love is back in the room. I'm thrilled. And of course, Nate was real early. Hi to Steve. And Denise, thank you so much for joining us again. So we're going to finish up our conversation here. And Exodus 21:20, I think you will provide some interesting conversation. So I'm glad to have you in here. We don't mind having some people with different views in the community. So that is absolutely fine. And I'll look forward. Now, I just have to let you know that I often during the broadcast will not respond to everything immediately. Multitasking is not my greatest strength. I tend to be very focused, but that doesn't mean I won't get to it. So what I generally do is go through the program, and then I will go ahead and I will deal with some things in the queue. I think that's what vocab calls it, the queue, and that's what I'm going to start calling it. So let's kind of get a start on, this is the second part of a two-parter. Now, I do want to let folks know if you're in the neighborhood, I'm not advertising the chili cook-off, but I am advertising the Doctrine for the Block conference. I'm not going to go ahead and play the clip for you. I'm going to be sticking that on Facebook. Also, if people didn't notice, I put a clip on Facebook about Thursday's broadcast. So if you go to Zion's Banner and Facebook, you'll see that clip. And I'm going to be doing more of that using ManyCam to broadcast to Facebook and maybe even to YouTube to kind of give you a backstage look at things. So I'm really kind of trying to include folks in if you're in the neighborhood. Okay, Doctrine for the Block is up and there. You can see it. Now, I'm not playing the clip, but you need to register. You save money if you register ahead of time. And so I want to encourage you to save a few bucks. If you want to know where that money goes, let me let you know that at least one or two of the speakers are coming from out of town, and I know what plane fare costs. And then some of us may be remembered a little bit at the end of the conference. And so your money is going to help speakers, going to help with equipment, certain costs for the conference. Nobody's getting wealthy off this. We just really want to bring kind of a concerted effort here in Phoenix. And that's why that's there. So that's a little plug again. By the way, there will start being a plug for the Muslim Outreach and Conference in Phoenix with George Saig. And so I want to let you know that that's another big event. We've got some folks coming from California. I will be doing some of the training. There will be outreach. It's an exciting time. George is a great guy. You will start seeing that up and running. Well, that's enough of the shameless commerce division, so to speak. I hope to get to meet some of you personally at one of these conferences. Let me get started with the PowerPoint here. We're taking the second part of a two-part series. I called it, Is Jesus a Republican or a Democrat? Now, just by way of recap, to kind of let folks know, we dealt with Jesus's general worldview, which was creational and redemptive. We're going to talk about his view of the role or view of government. Now, a word or two to the wise. We pointed out last week that Jesus's chosen form of government would be a theocratic monarchy, not a democracy. And so when we were discussing this topic, part of the answer we discovered was that Jesus would be neither a Republican or a Democrat, because really a theocratic monarchy would have neither. But we did say that there were certain ethics that Jesus would indeed agree with, and certain things that he would be less likely to agree with. Today we're going to look at his view of government. Now, word to the wise, I love biblical theology, and I do not believe that the Bible is a textbook. The Bible is a love story. And so we are going to try and piece this together. So let me just rest you assured that it's not like looking through an encyclopedia and looking under view of government. We're going to try and develop some systematic theology from biblical theology in general. And that's what we're attempting to do here. And that's really the way you should start systematic theology, is from biblical theology. But we're going to see what we can piece together. And so I'm going to switch things over on the PowerPoint and talk about the background of the institution of government. Now, you're going to get more of a view of that tonight, which is really kind of neat. Now, Exodus is thrown in a comment. Exodus 21:20. Can you hang with me? Because I tend to be a little focused. There's a part of me that's a teacher as an apologist, and a part of me that shares the gospel. And so I'm going to ask Exodus 21:20 to stay with us, because I'm glad you're here. I don't mind divergent opinions, and I really would like to deal with your comments. Can I just bring up the reason for government? And then I'm going to jump real quickly. The reason for government is given in Genesis 9:2-6. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil. And then when we go to Exodus 9, now why did I jump to Exodus 9? Because Exodus 9 is off of Exodus 6. So the way we're working the narrative is, if it's a story, and I'm reading it as a true story, okay, I honestly believe that the book given to my forebears and the book that God gave is true. So let's just operate within that. We can ask questions about that later, but I'm convinced for a lot of reasons. And you can even ask me about those reasons, and that's fine. The fear of you and the dread of you will be on every beast of the earth and every bird of the air and all that moves on the earth and all the fish in the sea. They are given into your hand. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, and I've given you all things, even the green herbs, but you shall not eat the flesh with the life in it, that is its blood. I know that might sound a little funny, but God is dealing with the changes related to creation and the way he's going to go ahead and work things with humankind. He does not have humankind where he wants them to be as image bearers, but he's working with them where they are. And what's important is that the issue of life's blood comes up, and it says, I will demand a reckoning from the hand of every beast, I will require it, and from the hand of man. From the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood will be shed, for in the image of God he made man. Now, that gives us the reason for government. We're going to talk about the Jewish view of government. So, if you've never heard about the Noahide laws and the role they play, that's we're going to go there. But if you're going to have a demand that men are accountable for killing other men, then you have to have a governmental system to go ahead and do that. And so we see the reason for government has to do with the limiting of evil after the flood and the enforcement of a moral code societally on individuals. I do want to briefly address Exodus 21:20 asks about eating flesh with the blood in it. Actually, there is a way to kosher an animal. And so you can remove the blood from it. There are ways to draw the blood out. And the idea is that you're not to eat the meat with the blood still in it. You're to attempt to remove that life's blood. So it is not God asking the impossible of man. It is God asking man to regard blood differently. In terms of burning people in hell, my general take on that is if someone came into your house and killed your family, would you not expect that there would be some penalty? Since man is an image bearer and he is polluting God's image when he sins and does great evil, God, who cares about his image, cares about that. And so, very simply, if man chooses not to be an image bearer, if he decides he does not want to live with God, then he has to be sent to a place where God isn't. And you see, as C.S. Lewis said, people want goodness, peace, and love without God, but he cannot give it because there is no such thing. So a place without God is a place without love. It's a place without goodness. It's a place without light. And if you go and you think about a place like that, you have basically hell. So hell is the only place in the universe that God can send people who are determined to live apart from him. And so that's kind of my answer to that. It is not God being the gleeful inquisitor. It is God giving man what he asked for. And by the way, that's respecting man as a moral decision maker. So, I can't answer everything, every molecule, really? No. Did it say every molecule? Does the word a molecule appear in the Hebrew in Genesis 9:2-6? No. So don't read things into the text that aren't there. This was not written to 20th century individuals with electron microscopes. This was written to my people long ago. It's written to a Mideastern people during a certain time period. And really, if you read someone else's mail, you have to understand the original recipient is talking to the person who first got the letter. And you have to read it with their understanding. Exodus 21:20 is commenting again. I do want to get through some of the stuff here. We've got a great community, but they did tune in to hear some of this stuff. So I'm going to ask that you, Exodus 21:20, allow me to go through the material. I will keep your stuff in the queue. I wish I could put it up so everybody could see it, but I don't have Ecamm. I have Manycam because I have a PC. And what I will do is I will address some of your concerns and dialogue with you and those of the community that want to stay. I invite you to stay. But I do want to get through some of the material because it is what I advertised. It would be false advertising not to deal with the topic at all. So we I have to kind of go ahead and do that. Let's keep moving through. You do need to understand that the rabbis read this seriously and they deduced certain commands from it. We could argue with their deductions, but they, reading this material, assumed certain basic general commands were given to humankind. They became known as the Noahide laws. There's a lot of discussion as to how much the Noahide laws affected the way Paul saw the message of Jesus spreading among the Gentiles. What should be the minimum moral requirement? And some debate that. Okay? What you need to understand is that the rabbis saw that God would not leave man without moral guidance at all. And so they believed that there was information morally, not only in conscience and in the image of God in man, but that was actually given to man through Noah. The notion of fundamentals of a legal order appear in Jewish law in connection with the Noahide laws. And you have a Berita that states that. The rabbis taught, Berita is a very early Talmudic writing that existed. The rabbis taught 7 commandments were given to the descendants of Noah Noah, to establish a legal order. See, I will require the blood of anyone murdered from the hand of the murderer. So to establish a legal order, to refrain from blasphemy, idolatry, incest, bloodshed, robbery, and eating the flesh of a live animal, thus the blood being in it. So that's where the Noahide laws come in. Now, all I'm stating is that even in the Jews of that sort of Second Temple period, there was an idea that God, through Noah, had something to hold the nations accountable to, and that would include establishing a legal order. So I'm just kind of giving some historical background here because I really sort of believe in history and enjoy history, and I think the Bible is a book of history. Who is the originator of government? Well, if you, as I, believe that Jesus is the Shekinah glory, that's that actual physical presence of God, where God dwelt with his people, even though he was omnipresent and localized himself, then you would indeed believe that if you actually look at that Shekinah and you take Hebrews seriously and you take who Jesus is seriously, then you would see that Hebrews 1 through 3 states God at various times in various ways spoke in past to the fathers being the patriarchs and the Jewish people by the prophets. In these last days, he spoke to us. Now, that would include those the gospel went out to. So that ethical monotheism spread as God desired it to, and spread in terms of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay? Now, what's important here is he spoke to us through his Son, who he appointed heir of all things, through whom he made the world, who being the brightness of his glory and the expressed image of his person. Now, understand what's being said here. The writer of Hebrews is saying that Shekinah glory came and dwelt among us in the person of Jesus. Now, if God is the originator of government in Genesis 9, then we could say that Jesus is also an originator of government. Now, I know I'm moving a little quick through this, okay? But my point is that one, through the incarnation, can say that if God originated the idea that man would have government, then Jesus becomes the originator of government too. By the way, for those who came in, I am keeping a dear visitor to the room, Exodus 21:20. Questions in mind. What we see is that the indication is that one of the main purposes of government, as far as Jesus was concerned, was the maintaining of social order. We have good reason to believe that after the flood, where God commands that a legal system is provided for and would be necessary because he's going to hold people accountable, that government would then come about. Paul reiterates this. So if you don't want to take my word on it, Paul, who was taught by Jesus for 3 years and saw the risen Christ, states, "For he," government is the idea, "is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore we must be subject, not only because of wrath, but for conscience sake." So Paul is reiterating the basic idea that Jesus would have had, that government's main purpose is to go ahead and maintain societal order. And let me just say that if you're in the queue, and we have someone in the queue who has a lot of questions, if this raises new questions, put them in the queue. That means type them out and put them in the chat, because I'll look over the chat after. The question becomes, many people have a question about social justice. Now, those who are of a socialistic bent look at the government in terms of social justice as they define it. Okay? And so what about social justice? Amos 1 through 15. We're going to look at Amos 1 through 15. So if you have a cell phone Bible, or if you have a regular Bible, Amos addresses the nations, and God says he's holding the nations in Amos accountable for certain crimes. And so that's why I'm turning to Amos, because it's one of those great places where you see what God expected of the nations. Now, as I'm doing that, do understand that I'm reading the tabs from my Bible, because my Bible is in the Jewish order, which puts the prophets in a slightly different place. So I do not have my Bible. I did not grow up with a Bible with the same order, the books in the same order. So I have to kind of go back between Hebrew order and English order. Let me take a little bit of this. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I want you to see he's judging the nations. Thus says the Lord, verse 3 of Amos 1. For 3 transgressions of Damascus, and for 4, I will not turn away its punishment, because they have threshed the Gilead with implements of iron, and they have sent a fire into the house of Hazael, which they devoured the palaces of Ben-Hadad. I will also break the gate bar of Damascus, and cut off the inhabitants from the valley of Evan, and one who holds the scepter from Beth Eden. The people of Syria shall go into captivity to Kir, says the Lord. Now, I want you to read this, okay? Someone had and I want to give you an understanding of it. Is this about social justice and poor and rich and social economic classes? What's the background of God making these comments in Amos? Well, there are historic things there. Okay? The threshing of the Gileads with iron implements referred to machines, and it's sort of like taking a steamroller and going over live people. Okay, they were using these horrible implements of war and grinding people live down. And what this really was about was war crimes. Okay? So the social justice being discussed in Amos, in this case, deals with war crimes. Okay? In fact, when you go into the next section, where God talks about the transgressions related to Gaza, what he's talking about there is that the Philistines sold a portion of its many prisoners taken at the time to the Edomites and the rest of the Phoenicians, who disposed them to the Greeks, and the Hebrew is used for Greeks. Joel simply mentions the latter circumstances because, in accordance with the object of the prophecy, his design is to show the wide dispersion of the Jews. This has to do with Joel, which is going to end up discussing some things that relate to, that are connected. We call these cross references, okay? And so what's going on here in Amos again is war crimes. And what I'm establishing is that when God talks about social justice with the nations, it's usually around war crimes or egregious violations of basic civil justice. But it is not about economic justice per se. So I'm trying to establish that. And that's what I'm going ahead and doing. Now, did Jesus have a problem with uneven distribution of wealth? Because that's the big buzzword now. Okay? That seems to be the big thing. And so let's look at it. First of all, we need to understand what's meant by equity in Jesus' day. Equity had a certain meaning to it, not equality of outcome or level of material gain. Jesus' concept of equity was related to the Torah. Now, I don't think it was just because he was an average Jew. I believe because he was the Torah's author. And so I've used this verse before, but it's a really key verse in Torah. You shall not have a bag of differing weights, a light and heavy. You shall not have your house differing measures, a small and a large. You shall have perfect and just weights, a perfect and just measure, that your days may be lengthened in the land the Lord your God is giving you. For all such things, for all who do such things, all who behave unrighteously are an abomination to the Lord. So what God is concerned about, okay, is not equality of outcome, but equality of opportunity or even-handed application of a standard. Okay? And that's the concern of God that ties into his character. And so that's Jesus's background as far as equity. Okay. In fact, the word having a perfect measure is the word we get shalom from. It has whole or complete. Equity of measure and equity of treatment, not equity of outcome and equity of income, is God's concern. In other words, the rules and standards need to be applied equally to all. And that's Jesus's concern. Jesus also had no problem with a uneven distribution of materials and funds because he understood this reality. This is a very important reality. People get into trouble whenever they ignore this reality. He understood the reality of a fallen world. Is the world ugly? Yes. Is it God's fault? No. The ugliness that you see in the world is a direct result of our parents' choice, Adam and Eve. And so if you see ugliness in the world, you see that ugliness for a reason. Now, if you want to go ahead and have a different worldview, you can. But the reality is Jesus's worldview was essentially was creational. And I would argue that that's as legitimate as anything else. But I'll argue that during the time in the queue. Jesus also understood two important things, and I want to make this really clear. Unequal distribution of good and resources provide for the opportunity to develop and practice love. There can be no virtue if there is no opportunity to choose virtue. And so if everybody had the same thing, then there would be no need for me to lovingly help someone who didn't. Okay? And God's concern is not our happiness or our comfort, but our holiness and the development of God-likeness or virtue. And so the opportunity to practice love is really important. It also gives us the ability to avoid neglect of the spiritual. Now, how do I know this? Where do I get this from? Well, I have a basis for it. Whosoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? 1 John 3:17. Jesus knew that an unequal distribution of materials allowed people to share, demonstrate love, and give to others without expecting anything in return. Goods can cause one to neglect God through self-sufficiency. I do see a great question in the queue from Exodus 21:20. I will definitely take that question. The fallenness of the world, that's a good question. And so I'm going to go ahead and take that. How do we know that? Well, a rich man approached Jesus and said, "Good teacher, what shall I do that I may have eternal life?" And he said to him, "Why do you call me good? There is no one good but God," which is interesting. If you want to enter the life, keep the commandments. That was a very Jewish answer. You need to understand that. Keep the mitzvot. I mean, that's a Jewish answer. Go to a rabbi, you say, how do you end up being okay with God? So you do good mitzvahs and you're a nice person. You go ahead, God will go ahead and look past any weaknesses you have and go ahead, and that's the way. Okay? And so he lists off some of the commandments. thinks he's doing well. And Jesus gives the commandments because this was an expected Jewish answer. So Jesus is going to give him exactly what he expects. And the young man gives the answer. All these things I've kept since my youth. What do I lack? Now that's very interesting because Jesus has given him a very Jewish answer, knowing full well he hasn't kept the commandments. And he says, what do I lack? Because he still sensed a lack in himself. And he said, so glad you asked. If you want to be complete, that's what the idea perfect has for it. Go sell what you have, give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. You asked. Let's put it real Jewish. So new, you asked what more you need to do? Here, sell your possessions. You'll have treasure in heaven. Come follow me. You have a new career. I've just given you a new career choice. Sell what you have, abandon it, fully go ahead. Put your trust in me. Follow me. And don't worry, you'll have an inheritance. When the young man heard this, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Then Jesus said to his disciples something crazy to say to Jewish people back then. Assuredly, I say to you, it is hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again, I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go into the kingdom of heaven. And when the disciples heard this, they were astonished and said, who can be saved? Why did they say that? Because Jewish people tended to have the mindset, now not totally wrong, okay? Not wrong, but Jewish people knew the nation would be blessed if it followed God. They extrapolated that to the individual is blessed whether he follows God or doesn't. They took it from the corporate covenantal level and they began to apply it all the way through, uniformly on the individual level. And so Jesus says something crazy because a rich person is obviously pleasing God. He's being blessed by God. And so they say, well, now if a blessed person can't make it into heaven, who can make it into heaven? So that's a little bit of Jewish background on Matthew, even on a non-Thursday. Look at that. What was government created to do? Well, I'll tell you what it wasn't created to do. Jesus was not a socialist. Why? Because he tells a parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man going to a far country, and he calls his servants, and he delivers to them his goods, and he gives different amounts to different servants. I have the whole passage up there, but I'm not going to read it to you. It's called the parable of the talents. Now, I think it could go beyond monetary talents, interestingly enough, because we talk about having talents. But that was also the name of the coinage back then, and Jesus gives different amounts to the different servants, and how they handle those different amounts determines how he goes ahead and gives them more responsibility. By the way, I think there's a really cool ethic in this. God's reward for faithful service is more service and responsibility. Isn't that interesting? Jesus didn't believe distribution of goods was the main thing. Now, this is funny because there's actually a case like that. Two brothers go to Jesus and they try to do the monetary thing, okay? Then one from the crowd said, Teacher, tell my brother to divide my inheritance with me. Look at this. Now, a socialist would say, that's exactly right. Jesus is a good socialist. You should take from the wealthy brother who is not dividing the inheritance and give to the others 50-50 because that's only fair. But he said to him, Man, who made me judge or arbitrator over you? He said to them, Take heed, beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. Jesus' definition of the good life was not merely economic. And I want to make that very clear. One of the great problems with socialism is it's based on covetousness. Why is it wrong for someone to have more than me? Because I want what they want. They have. That's covetousness. It also removes the opportunity for virtue. Because if I have the same amount, you have the same amount, then what's the need for me to go ahead and give to you because you have a need that I can meet? And so Jesus was not a socialist. He didn't believe distribution of goods or resources equally was the main thing at all. And again, he believed government was to maintain order, not guarantee order, equality of outcome. I know this broadcast has been a little shorter, but we've got some great questions. Okay. And so I'm kind of glad we have a little extra time because I think we're going to be able to use it for some very interesting discussion. Remember that I couldn't divide this out evenly, but I assure you we've got some great stuff to talk about tomorrow, and we've got great questions. Jesus' understanding of government was not the same, and if you have the PowerPoint, please correct that. And that must be acknowledged by the followers of Jesus. Jesus would not buy into the modern progressive program. Good question from Radical Love. Was it more relational in meaning? Well, I think in some ways Jesus's view was more about personal virtue and relationship and reflecting the image of God than it was about economics and equality of outcome. And I can say this as a missionary who is not necessarily doing hasn't really had the high life. Okay, there are some great questions. And so I'm going to go back. I'm going to put me on camera, and I'm going to go back up. And Exodus 21:20, he talks about what's called not moral evil, but we have two types of evil. We have moral evil, or we have the evil done by individuals, and then what we have is called natural evil. Philosophers distinguish between the two of these. Let me show you a good book, which I'd recommend, Exodus 2:20, if you want to read a good book on the subject. Okay, and I'm putting this up here. The Theodicy of Love. In fact, we're probably going to deal with the problem of evil. So I want to encourage you, Exodus 2:20. We're going to have 2 episodes on the problem of evil in terms of providence, but we're probably going to do one. I should say, here's what I want to encourage you. We're probably going to do something on the Theodicy of Love and the problem of evil. So if you want more, tune in, be following. On my website is upcoming topics. We will actually deal in greater detail with this book, The Theodicy of Love and Theodicies and the Problem of Evil, but that doesn't prevent me from giving you some sort of answer now. By the way, I can go ahead and in Patreon or on in the description here, I can go back and put the ISB for the Theodicy of Love. I might be able to do it tonight before we finish. Okay. So let's go back here, and he's asking about smallpox, Ebola, polio, some serious ugliness, which was created by God. No, it wasn't. Well, didn't God create everything? God didn't create everything in the form that it takes now. What if polio was totally harmless to us in whatever it was before the fall? In other words, when you're talking about polio, you're talking about a specific germ that acts a specific way in a fallen world. But what if these viruses and things actually served a useful purpose or were non-harmful? What if Ebola and smallpox weren't the sort of viruses that you had around, and what you had were certain microbes that became bad and non-beneficial because of the fallen world, in the same way that animals behave differently after the fall? It is possible that microbes behave differently after the fall. So when Exodus 21:20 says that these things were created by God, I don't buy that, because I believe the fall changed the nature of creation. So what Exodus 21:20 would have to do to establish his case in this particular instance is to demonstrate that the microbes involved always existed before the fall, they existed in the same way, and they had the same effects. Now, as far as the killing of babies, again, you're reading a love story written to a Mideastern people. And by the way, Exodus 2:20, I want to commend you. You're sharing some of the same objections that I dealt with when I was doing some street sharing with people about God just this weekend. And so I'm glad you brought these to the community. The problem I have is, again, don't take 20th century ethics and put them don't take 20th century ethics and put them in the context of a 20th century world. I mean, other way. Don't take a book written to a Mideastern society at a certain time in history where God is going and dealing with those people in order to make their society better and allow them to develop greater godlikeness, and try to apply it to a post or to a society influenced by the Judeo-Christian ethic for a period of 200 years. Even further, because Western civilization has been influenced by a Judeo-Christian ethic for 2,000 years. Exodus 2:20 asks again, I don't need to save my God, because my God is the standard of right and wrong. See, Exodus 2:20, you couldn't complain about evil if there wasn't a God, because if there is no God, there is no good and there is no evil. There's no objective basis for good and evil without God. Therefore, when you invoke these things as being evil, my question to you is, why are they evil? Give me an objective reason that is transcendent for why these things are evil without invoking a moral standard that has a source. And so my God doesn't need to be saved. My God is the standard by which you even ask the question. As to my God being in control, my God permits things because he's given human beings choices. And that gets into the theodicy of love. Human beings can't have choices if no choices are allowed. And so God, in giving man agency, allows men to choose badly as well as to choose good. Okay, Exodus 2:20, I'm glad you're here, but that's a silly argument. It's a silly argument, actually, because your God, I don't know who he is. I have no writings from him. I have no personal history with him. I have no individual who came and rose from the dead in his name, so I don't know who your God is. As for my God being real, I say he's real. Jesus, who rose from the dead, says he's real. Other believers who have encountered him and have a relationship with him say he's real. So unless you can discount all of our testimonies as absolutely impossible, you can't say nobody says he's real, because people have been, Western civilization says he's real. The Jewish people say he's real. No, I'm not the same as every religion. Because Exodus 21:20, my religion is not based on me being good enough. I want you to compare all the religions of the world and answer me this. Which other faith promised a deliverer who himself was God, who would come and pay the penalty for his creatures? And I haven't found one yet. While Judaism contains the seeds of that very argument, that very scenario, it doesn't say it. Can I dispute the testimony of Muslims? Yes, I can, because their testimony contradicts themselves. I've spoken with Muslims. Islam says the Bible's true, by the way. But then Islam says the Bible's false. Well, can the Bible be true and be false? Can it be corrupted and be accurate? Can it be followed, as Muhammad says to you, while it's corrupted? So yes, I can, because I can look at the basic attributes of God. I can look at the consistency of any religion within itself and within some basic existential facts in the universe, and I can measure it up. And by the way, I'm not the only one. Tune in to Robbie Zacharias. I can give you some of the URLs. He's absolutely brilliant. He's done a lot with this. And I can tell you too, I didn't grow up believing in Jesus. I grew up under rabbinical Judaism. So I can give you a different testimony as far as life under rabbinical Judaism and life under Jesus. So I have a testimony. And so, yes, I can refute Muslims. I can refute Muslims using their own book as self-contradictory. I can turn to my testimony and tell you that Allah does not love you. I can tell you Allah never died for you. I can tell you Allah never sent a redeemer. I can tell you Allah doesn't meet the demands of his own goodness in you so that you may be like him. Jesus died so that he was made like us and died so that we might be made like him. That may be true. And every person in the world believes today isn't Sunday, but that doesn't prove today is Sunday. You can't establish a claim on the basis that everyone else believes contradictory things. That's a faulty argument. It's a non-legitimate argument. Everyone else can believe that chocolate is indeed vanilla. Everyone else can believe that chocolate is pumpernickel, peanut butter, and other things, but it doesn't make anything true or false. True or false is a different thing. So that's what we call a straw man argument. Okay? And it's not a valid concern. But I am glad that you're sharing these concerns. As an apologist, I love to think about these things. But you see, as a Jew, I came in contact with prophecies made thousands of years before Jesus, and then came in contact with the Jesus of those prophecies. And I came to a conclusion that he fit the bill of that one, and then he ended up changing my life. Think about it this way. Would the average Jewish man under rabbinical Judaism be preaching the person of Jesus Christ? Well, you can go ahead and argue, but I didn't use a straw man argument. I used what's called an argument from religious experience. By the way, Alvin Plantagenet, who is one of the top philosophers in the world, and noted so, not just by Christian people, but actually he is the head of philosophy at a college, written tons of books. I can give you a URL. He's got some great fun videos. Argues that religious experience is what's called properly basic. When you got up in the morning, Exodus 21:20, you knew you were awake. How? You could be sleeping thinking you were awake. You could be sleeping right now thinking you're awake. Your firsthand experience of your wakeful state right now and that you're on this program is basically properly basic and thus valid. So I don't have to think you're a brain in a jar somewhere. And by the way, neither do you, because you're experiencing firsthand that you're here. I experienced firsthand the truth of the things I came to believe. Therefore, my experience is not a straw man. It's the same basic way that you arrive at the fact that you're here and that you're awake. So that argument really doesn't work. Calling it a straw man argument doesn't make it a straw man argument. There are properly basic beliefs in philosophy, and religious experience can be considered a properly basic belief if it meets certain criteria. Now, Exodus 21:20, you're probably saying, what are the criteria of properly basic beliefs? Well, that would be a great topic for another broadcast. And it would be absolutely wonderful to go over. Or I can give you the material by Elvin Plantagena. It's about a 5-minute video that discusses whether religious beliefs can be considered properly basic and whether, as moderate foundationalists, we can have properly basic beliefs. You are free to believe in God or not. Everybody is. Everybody is free to believe in God or not believe in God. But what they can't say is that belief in God and Jesus is ruled out. They can simply say they don't choose to believe it. And I respect that. There was a time when I didn't choose to believe it. But that doesn't mean Jesus was ruled out. By the way, if I choose to believe that today is not Wednesday, that doesn't make it not Wednesday. So Radical Love said, follow the evidence and research and seek the truth. And I would say something else. God is a personal being. Now, here's the funny thing. Seek the truth, but you also might want to consider whether existentially you want to seek the truth as well as intellectually. And what I mean by that is that at some point I asked God to show me. Now, if there was no God, I lost nothing, because obviously no one would have answered, and that would have answered me well. But if I find God after asking that question, then I have just one more reason to believe that I was communicated with. Sort of like asking my wife where my coffee is. If she doesn't answer because she's not home and she's not there, then I don't get an answer. But if she brings me my cup of coffee, I have just another good reason to believe that she indeed is there. So these are all really good, and I hope you come back again, especially when we do the thing on theodicy or providence and human freedom. I'd love to have you in on those conversations. Theodicy would be absolutely great where we talk about the theodicy of love and some of those things. So that's absolutely wonderful. By the way, Exodus 21:20, you probably don't agree with me still, and that's okay. I would invite you to click the subscribe button, because just because you get a message that we're on the air, we're doing a certain topic that may not be of interest, you'll at least have the opportunity. And, you know, I welcome the dialogue. So click the subscribe button, please. You know, there's no acid test that people have to agree with me to hit the subscribe button. And, you know, we may have the day come when there are some Muslims that come in, and I would love to dialogue with them too. So I don't know. You're free to throw up another thing. Now, do understand that eventually my voice wears out. It's not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of the time of night here and long days. Radical Love says she loves Robbie. Yes. I've always enjoyed him. I like him personally. He's questioning why God needs worship in a sense. Can I state it that way? Exodus 21:20, that you're really wondering why God would demand worship. Um, um, well, good. I've enjoyed meeting David Wood. I don't get to spend a lot of time with him. He's kind of a cool guy, but we're from very different backgrounds, so I only get so much time. The Theodicy of Love. Yes, let me give you name and an author here. The book is by John Peckingham. Peckham, sorry. By the way, I read it before, but my kids gave me my own copy for the holidays. I'm so excited. I want to go through and read it again. Part of me wants to mark it up. Part of me doesn't. Let me give you an ISBN number. I'm just looking for that right now. That way you can just plug it into Amazon, because Amazon will actually look for ISBN numbers. So I'm going to stick the ISBN as well as I can here. I have to tell you, I'm not a good typer. I had typing very briefly in school, and I have a little bit of a eye-hand coordination problem. It's why writing is so difficult for me. My mind works quicker than my hands, and so writing is difficult. So I'm on one hand enjoying doing my dissertation. On the other hand, it's really been hard for me because I'm a better speaker than writer. So hang out with me while I look at the ISBN number and get it right, because I don't want to mislead you at all. And someone can check this ISBN number if they want to right after I put it up, and just see if Amazon will get you the page. Also, in the resource section tomorrow, I can list that ISBN number page-wise for you, because I love giving people good materials. Okay, I have the ISBN. It should say ISBN there. That should work if you stick that in. And that'll get you the paperback version. You don't really need a hard version. It costs more. It's not an overly pricey book, but I find that paperbacks fit in my backpack when I'm hopping on a plane better too. So there's nothing wrong with a paperback. Some people get kind of, stuck on that, but I don't get stuck on that at all. Tomorrow night, we're going to deal with some theological issues around Matthew 7 through 12. So I hope you'll be back. I'm going to go ahead and post the thank you. Let me already say thank you to Steve Rudolph. You are wonderful. Some people support us through Chosen People, some through Patreon. I love you all. It's just different ways of doing the same thing. I want to stick that up there. I'll put the music up in the background, but if there's some more questions and conversation, we can go ahead and just put that up there real briefly. I'm going to turn the music way down, but it's a cool tune. I want to get the English Country Garden up there too. There we go. Hopefully you can hear me also. I might put that down a little further because that seems just a little bit too high. And we got some background music. Steve's getting ready to go. If I see that it looks like folks pretty much are done with the evening, then hopefully I'll see a bunch of you. And I want to go ahead and say thank you all for being here. Check out John Peckham's book. And I'm going to get ready to say goodnight. I know it's probably later where you are, but I need to drink some water and kind of get my voice back a little bit. Wait a minute. Okay. Okay, that's just kind of sometimes there are comments for the community that I think the community will enjoy, but I don't necessarily need to respond to. I mean, I wouldn't add anything. So, hey, special thanks. It's so good to have Radical Love back. Okay, great.